Hello everyone, once again another deck profile, this time on the Siana deck. Had this deck ever since release, but never did a deck profile on it since every deck was kind of the same. But with Lyrical Divine's Booster 1, we got some huge new upgrades and actually improved the deck a lot, along with a promo which also helped out the deck a lot. But other than that, I have to just say this deck is just fun to play. Its playstyle focuses on basically tricking your opponent to whether give you the advantage or make their opponent in a disadvantage. And here comes one big weakness of the deck already, and it's the part where it lets your opponent decide. Because letting your opponent decide what they want to do can become a weakness of a deck, especially this one. So anyway, cool in design. I really like the design and the Halloween theme, especially the face. And it's just overall just a fun deck. It's just meant to manipulate your opponent, make them make a choice, whether to give you advantage or make themselves a disadvantage. But once again, here is the part where it can be a disadvantage as well, and it could be a weakness to the deck. But anyway, let's begin with the deck profile with, of course, the Ride deck. So we start off with the grade 0 Siana, all warmed up because she's stretching. And then we go to the grade 1, which all the Sianas have the same first skill where at the end of battle, this card attacked by a rear guard of your opponent and you did not use a card to put in the guardian circle, your opponent has to make a choice whether to discard a card from their hand or bind the attacked unit. So basically, it's the type of skill where your opponent makes the choice, like I said earlier, whether they want to minus the one card from hand or minus the one card on the field. Yes, it does make your opponent have a choice. And yes, either way, it is a -1, but most of the time they will choose the one in the field, but that does give you some advantage. At the same time, it could also disadvantage you if you do not have specific cards ready, and that'll be explained why with the grade 3. But the second skill is when the grade 2 Siana rides on top of it, you can Soul Blast 1 to draw a card and then bounce all your opponent's front row rear guards back to hand. This is going to be very important for the playstyle because when your opponent has no front row rear guard, you get the extra benefits. In which we go to the grade 2, has the same first skill of to go up against your opponent's rear guards for them to make the choice. And the second skill is when rolled upon by grade 3 Siana, put a trigger from your drop zone or blitz order back to your hand. And blitz orders are going to be quite helpful for this deck, but unfortunately I don't really have any blitz orders in this deck considering that there's really not much space for it. In which we go to the grade 3 Siana, where if your opponent's front row along with guardian is total cards is 3 or less, this card gets crit +1 and drive +1. And here's some advantage for you, because if your opponent has less cards in the front row, aka the make the choice part, and they choose to bind their rear guards, you get the extra advantage. But say your opponent puts a lot of cards in the guardian or leaves them on the front row and you can't remove them, you're not going to really get much advantage. In which the second skill where you can put a trigger unit from your hand to soul to give it plus 15k power if being attacked. So basically you do not put any cards in the guardian circle and you get a soul for 15k shield with a trigger unit. And it's also nice that you can use those 10k shields and just make them into 15k shields. It's actually very helpful. But the only unfortunate thing is that it's only for one attack each time, so you can't do this multiple times in one attack. That can be one unfortunate factor. And the last skill is literally have your opponent make a choice. Overall, it's just a little fun little gimmick. I do like the guardian style that can bypass the guard restrict, but it can be a little issue that it's once per attack. So that's it for the Ride deck. To the main deck, I have 3 more Sianas for Persona Ride, and as you can tell from the Ride line itself, there's no extra power gain, so it will be inherent weakness of the deck as well, because it's going to need power. And speaking of power, I run 4 copies of the Order card because I run the Order engine of the deck. This one, you just play by counterblasting 1. The deck doesn't really use much counterblast, and it gives you the skill of all your front row units with 5k power. It's just helpful for some extra power. And into the grade 2 lineup, we start off with one of the main cards, the Durius, where when placed on rear guard, choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards and put it back to hand. And this will combo well with Siana, especially if your opponent decides to make the choice of not removing the rear guard. And since your opponent decides not to remove the rear guard, this basically bounces it back to hand. Yes, it doesn't make your opponent completely minus, and it could re-trigger on place in a way, but it does give you the little advantage of the extra drive check and crit. And it also makes your opponent have another choice to make during the guard step. In which the second skill where you can even use it before even hitting grade 3, where when this card attacks a Vanguard and your Vanguard Siana, you can counterblast 1 plus 5k power for each of your opponent's open rear guard. And if it gets plus 10k, aka 2 open rear guards, you get to draw a card as well. So it could be a big beater in the early game, helps you bounce back and extra draw power. It's just very helpful as well. And like I said, the deck doesn't really get much power on its own, but this is one of your big beaters, so it's just very helpful because of that. And then continue off is the Profish Runner June, which it's an axe skill. Once per turn, you can Soul Blast 1, and if you're Vanguard Siana, you can pay this cost to choose your opponent's front row rear guard and return them back to the hand. And you Soul Blast trigger unit plus 10k. You will be putting trigger units to your soul through Siana, so that's not entirely hard, but you mainly use it for the bounce sometimes because it's very helpful, and the fact that it doesn't need to be on play, so it could be even an early game attacker. I might bump this up to 4 because of it, but I have not really seen myself use this card that much. So 3 is good enough. And then to a new card that is very useful is the Aster, where when placed on rear guard, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and return it back to the hand. Then you can Soul Blast one card that is Siana or a trigger unit. It gets plus 5k power for each of your opponent's front row open rear guards. Extra power and also bounces, but the bounce is free, so that's pretty nice. But the main part is the second skill, where when your Siana Vanguard attacks, you can counterblast one to stand it. Yes, finally, Siana gets multi-attack. Why not run 4? And finally, because I run the order engine, I run the One Night Witch, where it's when you, during the turn, you play the order card and you placed it on rear guard. Other than a card ability, you can Soul Blast 1 to the top 5 to Superior Call. It's just helpful for some extra plussing, and also plus 10k with a draw with a counterblast on attack. And now to the grade 1 lineup, where I run Ruby, where placed on rear guard, bounce back one of your opponent's front row rear guards. Of course, very helpful, and it's free. With the second skill, where you can use less cards to quote-unquote not guard, where when your grade 3 Vanguard Siana gets attacked, you can put it to Soul. Helps out with Soul right there, and give it plus 10k power. Pretty nice. And then a promo called Lev Rank, where when placed on rear guard while your Vanguard is Siana, you can counterblast 1, Soul Charge 1, and then choose a card from your soul to put back to hand, which can be pretty nice. But the second skill, just like the other one, except that you have to Energy Blast 3 to put to Soul, and then give your Vanguard plus 15k on attacked. The only weakness about these two is that they have to be on the field, but it can be nice just to quote-unquote not guard the attack. And being 15k shield is actually more effective, and also you don't even use energy in this deck, so it's nice that you just have a way to use energy. And then to a new card that is actually helpful is the Rumi, where during your turn, if you have a grade 3 Siana, plus 2k, it could be 10k attacker or booster, which is nice, but the main part is the second skill, just to give Siana some pressure, some extra power that it actually needs, where when it boosts at least a grade 3 Vanguard Siana, you can Soul Blast a Siana or a trigger unit, and it gets plus 5k power for every open rear guards your opponent has. Considering that Siana doesn't get power on her own, and this is a 10k boost, that's 23k, and then plus some open rear guards, 33k, and it forces your opponent to use at least 3 cards if they don't want the triple drive. It's kind of helpful for some extra power, especially since Siana is kind of lacking on that, and Soul is not really much of an issue. And finally, for PGs, Halloween theme, because it's a Halloween deck. And then finally, Vampire OT, choose whichever one you like, but I personally choose the best theme. And then 8 crits for full on pressure, 3 draws. Just be careful with the draw since it is triple drive, so you can still deck out and you do draw a bit. And finally 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for this deck profile on my Siana deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? I mean, I just gave you my list, so go ahead and just give me other ideas, I guess. I am thinking of running Blitz orders in this deck, but considering the spacing, it might be a little hard. At the same time, I could get rid of the grade 2 unit card for the order just for the Blitz order, because technically I do have some draw power, so I am thinking about removing that, but at the same time, I kind of like it with the order card. And as for the PG, yes, do run Elemental Sanctitude if you have it, because it is a Blitz order still. But other than that, I don't really have much to say. It's just a fun deck with some issues, mainly with power, and there's really not much to say. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.